Good morning. I am Jose Luis Sanchez, Chair of the Association of American Chambers of Commerce in Latin America and the Caribbean, better known as AACCLA. Last year, I was honored to be re-elected for my second term as chair, and it is a great pleasure to welcome you to our 2021 Outlook on the Americas conference. This is AACCLA's first major hemispheric business event of the year, and thus an important opportunity to consider both in our short-term goals, including addressing COVID and reactivating economic growth, and our long-term vision for a more integrated, inclusive, and resilient hemisphere. My day job involves leading the Andean Central American Caribbean subregion for the Norris Division of International Flavors and Fragrances. Like many of you, I'm acutely aware of the global uncertainty that many companies are facing. When we met in Atlanta last year for last year's Outlook on the American, most of the world was just beginning to learn about the novel coronavirus. At that moment, the impact was almost unimaginable, especially in our region. International financial institutions estimate that Latin America and the Caribbean regional GDP contracted by 7.4% in 2020, with 4.1% projected growth for 2021. Despite the uncertainties around the speed and strength of the economic recovery, there is also opportunity. Because we know that with the engagement of the private sector and the commitment of leaders across the region, we have real opportunity to promote policies that can position the region to rebound after this pandemic. In fact, for more than 50 years, the American Chamber of Commerce, or AmChams, have been forefront of advocating for policies to stimulate economic growth through trade and investment between the United States and Latin America and the Caribbean. Together, these 23 AmChams represent more than 20,000 companies and over 80% of the U.S. investment in the region. AACCLA serves as the source of information on regional trade and investment issues, which is a critical point of communication between the AmChams, member companies of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, governments in the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and a vehicle for companies based in the U.S. to access business networks throughout the hemisphere. AACCLA, AmChams, and member companies stepped up to respond to new challenges and to partner with governments, multilateral organizations, and other stakeholders across the region to respond to COVID-19. We know that if we seize opportunities in trade, energy, infrastructure, supply chains, and human capital, we can rebuild, reimagine, and sharpen our competitiveness in a global economy and generate opportunities for our people. Even so, we must work together to advocate for an economic system based on free enterprise and respect for the rule of law. Reiterating the last point, the Chamber's rule of law and the business dashboard says it's best. Business is less effective, less efficient, and less predictable without the rule of law. It is in the spirit of this mission that we enter 2021 revigorated with the opportunity to enhance the relationship between the U.S. and Latin America and the Caribbean. You will find no better ally for job than this AmChams and our AACCLA Secretariat in Washington, D.C. But we cannot do any of this without our thought partners and supporters, AACCLA's Chair's Leadership Circle. So a sincere thank you for your strong partnership. It is now my privilege to turn to Myron Brilliant, Executive Vice President and Head of International Affairs at the U.S. Chamber. Myron drives the global business strategy of the Chamber, and over the course of more than 10 years has significantly expanded the breadth and depth of the Chamber's global engagement and advocacy. We look forward to hearing his insights at the Chamber's global priorities and the new Biden administration in the United States. Thank you.
I want to thank Jose Luis for the kind introduction and for kicking off this year's Outlook on the Americas Conference. I think Jose Luis made several important points that this is a critical time for the United States and for the region. Obviously, COVID and the pandemic is hanging over us, but we also have a transition, an important transition in government here in the United States with President Biden and his team coming on board. So I agree with Jose Luis. We have a lot of work to do and a lot of opportunity. The Outlook Conference is AACCLA's first major hemispheric business event of 2021. The forum really provides an opportunity for the U.S. Chamber and AACCLA leaders to examine issues impacting regional economic reactivation and hemispheric trade and investment. I really want to thank not just Jose Luis, but the entire AACCLA Leadership Circle companies for your great program support. Of course, I want to also thank the AACCLA team, particularly starting with Neil as the leader, as the Senior Vice President of the Americas program, Neil Harrington, and of course, for her leadership in AACCLA. I also want to recognize Max for his work preparing the program. And welcome back, Isabel, who's now a mom. Yay! And note that she's back with Team Americas, and many of you have worked with her over the years. Let me address three really major issues. One is obviously the transition going on at the U.S. Chamber. Second, our global priorities. And third, where we see the Biden administration and the business community working on the Americas. Let me start with the transition here at the U.S. Chamber. I want to recognize, as all you do, the instrumental role that Tom Donahue, our president and CEO, has played into making sure the Chamber is the largest and most influential business association in the world. And after 24 years at the helm, and I worked with him in all those 24 years, he's now transitioning to current President Suzanne Clark, who in mid-March at our board meeting will become the President and CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. AACCLA leaders, you've already received a note to this point earlier in the month, but I want you to know that the Chamber would not be where it is today without Tom's unparalleled vision and commitment. In addition to his advocacy at home in the United States, many of you know that Tom was a global traveler whose visits really helped to move the needle with foreign governments on key issues for business. And many of you were there in the rallying campaigns to push policymakers everywhere to pass many of the U.S. trade deals in the hemisphere, from CAFTA DR to agreements with Chile and Colombia and Panama and Peru. And of course, it's fitting that someone who was at the table to complete NAFTA more than a quarter century ago could cap his illustrious career by playing such a pivotal role in the passage last year of the USMCA deal. I'm really looking forward to working with our next president and CEO, Suzanne Clark, who's been at the Chamber in two different stints and who has, during her tenure at the Chamber, really served to commit to not only expanding our partnerships across the United States, but globally as well. I've seen firsthand her commitment in a lot of ways that I think will dovetail nicely into the work of the Americas and our work, frankly, around the globe. And I'm excited for her. I'm excited for the Chamber. She's the first female executive to lead the U.S. Chamber. And I know she's going to be very active in our global work. And I know she'll want to participate in future AACCLA meetings. And so I know last fall she got a chance to participate in the forecast on Latin America and the Caribbean conference in October. And she'll be doing a lot more of that going forward. So it's sad to see Tom, or bittersweet, I should say, to see Tom Donahue, an iconic figure, leave the stage. But it's also extremely happy time for us at the Chamber to see Suzanne Clark emerge as the president and CEO. Excited for her and excited for the Chamber's work ahead. Two, let me talk about the domestic and international priorities. To kick off our conversation, I really do want to highlight the Chamber's key priorities, which have implications for our global engagement. And no priority is clearly more important for both the Chamber, the Biden administration, and frankly, the entire business community than getting this COVID-19 pandemic relief right. The Chamber is prepared to play a critical role in relief passage with both branches of government as we have in the past. We need bipartisan support, and we're very much working with members of Congress and the White House in trying to get something done quickly. Starting with our advocacy for the CARES Act when the pandemic first hit in March 2020, and now, of course, dealing with the stimulus bill and the package that is being negotiated as we speak. The Chamber has been pushing for much needed support for millions of American families and small businesses throughout this period of time. And that demonstrated support will continue until we get through this pandemic period. And we will get to the other side of it. I'm confident of that, but there's more work to be done here in the United States, just as there is globally. More broadly in the hemisphere, as I referenced, pandemic response and inclusiveness and sustainable economic recovery will also be top of mind for all of us. Business is an indispensable partner for COVID-19 response and economic recovery. The private sector is leading the way to motivate and innovate and deliver and distribute vaccines, therapeutics, critical supplies, and to strengthen supply chains, infrastructure, and digitalization. There's a lot in what I just said. We'll hear later today from you and others who will be participating about the role of the digital transformation in the region. Important topic for AACCLA leaders to take up. Beyond pandemic relief, the Chamber's priorities are centered around reuniting the economy through a bold and ambitious agenda of infrastructure investments, workforce reskilling, which is really critical given the acceleration of our economy and the digitalization of our economy coming from COVID-19, immigration reforms high on our agenda, and reinvigorating America's global competitiveness through trade and other means. Investing in America's infrastructure will increase productivity, create jobs, and is critical for our global competitiveness. Modernization of the transportation infrastructure and upgrading and expanding broadband are essential to the ability of U.S. companies to connect with global markets and grow in the digital economy. Encouraged by the Biden administration and bipartisan support for infrastructure investment, but how we get it done is a big question mark. At a time where we're spending and investing in pandemic relief, we need to make more investments, perhaps $1 trillion, perhaps $2 trillion, who knows, in our critical infrastructure. The Chamber and the Bipartisan Policy Center, along with hundreds of local chambers of commerce and other business policy and labor groups, have called on Congress to enact an infrastructure package by the 4th of July, dubbed Build by the 4th campaign. Ambitious as it is, it's the right kind of thing to do for our country at this time. Reskilling our workforce, important also to connect the unemployed with job opportunities in new sectors, such as the health sector, more vaccines than available workers. And we have to really double down in critical areas of our economy, reskill our workforce, and frankly, address the shortage of jobs that are creating dynamics across America, as they are in many of your countries. So it's a priority for the Chamber to work with the Biden administration, in addition to reform our immigration system. Even if we employed all Americans willing and able to work, we would still face significant labor shortages in construction, agriculture, healthcare, and many other sectors. Here in the International Division of the U.S. Chamber that I run, we are very focused, obviously, on expanding trade and investment opportunities for U.S. companies, which will be critical for long-term growth and stability at home and abroad. And I will say I had a very productive conversation with Catherine Tai, the incoming USTR representative. It's really critical that we work with her and with the Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, certainly Secretary of Treasury and others, to ensure that we're making the right investments in our trade policies and in our investment agenda as well. So re-engaging globally is a high priority for the U.S. Chamber. We want to revitalize global alliances, restore U.S. leadership in multilateral institutions like the WTO and WHO, and even the OECD, and re-engage with the world through a bold trade agenda. Removing trade barriers and tariffs have been in place over the past 4 years will be an important step, but it's not the only thing we need to do. Pursuit of additional market opening trade agreements globally, deals with the UK, the EU, areas of opportunity in the Asia Pacific, in Africa, and certainly in the Americas are things that were top of mind for us. Building on trade protocols signed last year, for example, with Brazil and Ecuador, and deepen and support regional integration, something all of you participating here today truly believe in. Of course, top of the foreign policy agenda for the incoming administration will be the relationship with China. It's an area that the U.S. Chamber has spent a lot of time building a consensus around what is a constructive and pragmatic approach to this very important relationship that the world is watching. Our two economies are highly interconnected, but there are significant issues and there are areas of disagreement with China's policies. We do need to challenge China's unfair industrial policies and practices that affect U.S. companies and global markets. This is not just an issue for the United States. It's an issue we share with our allies in Europe and in Asia, and I would dare say even in the Americas. Protecting U.S. competitiveness is certainly something front and center in the minds of the U.S. government, but it's also in the minds of us in the private sector. How do we support enhancing U.S. competitiveness in areas like AI, big data, new energy vehicles, while also ensuring that we are selling and doing business in 95% of the markets that exist overseas? Full decoupling between the United States and China should not happen. It would lead to tremendous losses for key U.S. industries and therefore our workers, and of course would hurt our economy as a whole. It would certainly weaken the outlook for U.S. jobs, R&D, and global technology leadership. But we also must be clear-headed that some decoupling will happen because our national security interests will also factor in to how the Biden administration will look at the U.S.-China relationship. Count on the Chamber to advance other business priorities as well. Climate and sustainability are clearly important business opportunities as well as a priority of the incoming Biden administration. We've welcomed President Biden's action to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. A challenge of this magnitude requires global collaboration. American businesses are playing an important role creating innovative solutions to protect the planet, and we believe business should have a seat at the table. And we're confident we will have a seat at the table. And we've seen early signs from the administration reaching out to the Chamber and to other stakeholders to ensure that we're part of the conversation about how to build a growth agenda here in the United States and to work collaboratively with partners around the world. Data privacy, data governance, and cybersecurity are all also huge issues that we're focused on. The pandemic has certainly underscored the importance of the digital economy and accelerated broader digital transformation trends. To capture the full benefit of digitalization, crucial for policymakers to get data governance frameworks right. Ability for organizations to move data across borders and access information is more important as ever. And as a collaborative, risk-based approach to cybersecurity, we need to look at these issues clearly. Secure and resilient supply chains is another topic I want to raise today. International trade and global supply chains are an important factor for the manufacture and distribution of vaccines and other critical supplies. It's important to identify solutions that mitigate risks and avoid measures that will undermine pandemic response and long-term competitiveness. Now, let me turn to opportunities in the Americas under the Biden administration. And I know you're going to be talking about this throughout the conference. We see in the Americas a number of opportunities that we want to seize and we want to work closely with the Biden administration and obviously with the AmCham community and with the governments in the countries that you operate. First, the Summit of the Americas 2021. The U.S., as everyone knows, is scheduled to host the Summit of the Americas for the first time since 1994 when it was launched. This is really a huge opportunity and one that the Chamber has been involved in years past. An opportunity for us to look at a multilateral approach to advancing policies for pandemic response and building a stronger, more resilient, inclusive, and democratic hemispheric post-pandemic world. It's a platform to reinforce the strengthening of the rule of law to enhance regional competitiveness. It's an opportunity for the Chamber to play a leadership role with all the AmChams to facilitate the U.S. private sector's participation in the summit process through mechanisms such as the Americas Business Dialogue. And it's a commitment we're going to make to work with stakeholders and the Biden administration to ensure that the summit results in stronger partnerships between the private sector and governments and concrete actions to build a more resilient and inclusive hemisphere. It will concentrate and focus the attention of the leaders in the region. It's why we believe the Summit of Americas is a great opportunity for U.S. leadership in the region. Another opportunity is in the Central America and rule of law area. President Biden has made it clear that Central America will be a policy priority under his administration. We proposed a comprehensive regional strategy to build security and prosperity in partnership with Central America by addressing root causes of migration from countries in the Northern Triangle. The strategy really aims to do four things: mobilize private investment in the region, improve security and the rule of law, address endemic corruption, and prioritize poverty reduction and economic development. The Chamber and the AmChams have partnered in the past to promote prosperity in the Northern Triangle, and we look forward to working closely with the Biden administration to achieve these goals. The Chamber and AACCLA have a long-standing commitment to strengthening the rule of law in Central America and across the hemisphere. We're ready and willing and eager to collaborate with the Biden administration and other government leaders to do more. Earlier this month, AACCLA hosted a conference focused on digitalization, competitiveness, and strengthening the rule of law in Central Americas, in collaboration with many of you of the AmChams and the U.S. Department of State. Look for us to do more of this kind of programming going forward. We're very confident that these and the policy priorities related to trade and rule of law, climate and sustainability, and the work we're doing at home, working with the AmChams through AACCLA, will be a constructive pathway to make a difference and have an impact with this Biden administration and with the governments in the countries you represent. So let me just conclude by saying thank you to all the AACCLA members, the AmChams, and the companies participating in this important conference. You are at the forefront of advancing regional policy, not just in the rule of law space, but in the other critical drivers of recovery and growth, such as COVID-19, enhancing intra-regional trade, and advancing digitalization. With your help, the Secretariat is following up on an extremely successful 2020 to stake out a robust agenda for engagement in 2021. I'm looking forward to working closely with all of you this year in the common cause of the region's critical health and economic recovery. And I know Neil Harrington and his team is already underway with all of you to do this. Now on to today's impressive lineup of key regional government and business leaders who will highlight critical need and efforts underway to enhance the competitiveness and all the issues I've discussed today. Thank you all again for being here, for taking time at a very critical moment in our collective history, a difficult moment. And I hope you are safe and healthy and your families are. We wish you well, and we count on your support and your strong leadership and your advocacy. With that, let me turn this over to Ann to continue the agenda today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Myron for his kind words. He really heard the message of the United States, fell in good ears, and now we want to drive a very positive trade agenda. If we look at the numbers for 2019, before pandemic hit global trade, the trade flow in goods and services between U.S. and the other countries in the Western Hemisphere reached $1.9 billion. $1.9 trillion. The goal of strengthening and diversing the global supply chains have generated new expectations for investment. Trade bonds and regional integration in the Americas in order to identify trends and opportunities to strengthen recovery, economic recovery through trade and investment. That's why we have invited three distinguished panelists. Honorable Victor Bisonó, Minister of Industry, Commerce and SMEs in the Republic. Honorable Ramon Martinez, Minister of Commerce and Trade of Commerce and Industry of Panama, and José Manuel Restrepo, Minister of Trade, Industry and Tourism of Colombia. Welcome, dear ministers. I would like to start with the economic perspectives first. Minister Bisonó, just as an introduction, I'd like to invite you to share the economic perspectives and the priorities for 2021 in Dominican Republic. Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to thank AACCLA for the kind invitation to this activity today. And I'd like to also thank Anne McKinney for her kind introduction and the fellow ministers, Ramon Martinez from Panama and José Manuel Restrepo from Colombia. It's a pleasure to share this panel with you. Dominican Republic, and according to CEPAL's numbers, we have about 5% of growth projection for this year, which is a number that is quite promising for us, since it is way above the average growth rate in all the region. The central bank and we should take into account that it's being very favorable for us. The financial industry has been pretty good. So we want to help. We want to thank the Dominican Republic banks, because the financial industry has grown by 25%. Also, foreign trade, direct foreign trade in Dominican Republic has been at around $2.7 billion, which is a great amount of money entering the country and a great support for a comprehensive money recovery. And that proves that Dominican Republic is quite the country to receive foreign investment. In Dominican Republic, we have a free trade zone that is quite efficient. And since we started 6 months ago with the new administration in the head of President Binabed and this Ministry of Trade and Industry as a team, we unified all the industrial world, not only the one in the free trade area, but also the national one, like one single muscle, to make it an import zone. And for them, we have the best news, because this past January, it's been the January with the greatest growth and with the best numbers in the history of the free trade zone here in Dominican Republic. We have about 700 companies that have about 180,000 direct jobs and that account for 57% of the total exports for Dominican Republic. That being said, for us, that is a great sign that 2021, we're going to close with very positive numbers. And I cannot close this participation without saying that it is a priority, and I'm sure that for the whole world, it is the case. Health is a priority here in Dominican Republic. We've had the first batch of vaccines that came, in this case, from China. That's where we were able to buy the vaccination for this moment. And we are at about 1 million vaccines. And we are going to now give the shots to the first line respondents. And we want to later open schools. So we will give the vaccines to the education community. Thank you very much, Minister. Minister Martinez, what are the economic perspectives and the priority for Panama this year? Good morning. I'd like to thank Anne McKinney, and I'd like to also greet Victor and Jose Manuel for being here with me in this panel. 2020 has been a very difficult year for all the countries around the world, and still 2021, we have a great perspective. The pandemic has been pretty much controlled in our country so far. All of our trade activities have been opened. We have a vaccination plan that has already started, and that every week we get about 700,000 vaccines. So that gives us a lot of certainties to our businessmen and business executives. Panama has an economic reactivation program that includes our public works, such as the Line 3D of the metro in Panama. Also, a lot of highways and roads. But most of all, the biggest foreign investment attraction is key for us. As you know, Panama is a facilitator of good investments. It's the hub of hubs, we call it. That's what we call it. And it's gotten that reputation because we have a community hub. We also have a financial hub. More than 60 international banks have presence in our country. A digital hub, since we have 7 fiber optics in the region. And then communication and technology companies come to Panama with the air hub as well of the international airport of Tucumán and the logistics hub anchored in the Panama Canal, and 5 ports that are the most important in Latin America, 3 in the Atlantic, 2 in the Pacific. And our priorities, most of all with the United States, is to increase exports to that country and to get more advantages and more opportunities among the 2 countries, but also to leverage with the free trade agreements that Panama has with more than 22 countries. In that regard, we would like to increase investment, foreign investment, that comes from the United States, the country with the most investment from the U.S. There are 33 American multinational companies operating under the ZEM agreement in Panama. And we are, of course, working on a new trend that is known as nearshoring, where companies come, they settle here, closer to their destination, And we then make contacts with different authorities in the United States so that we can continue in that line. So, very positive perspectives after a very difficult time that we have under. Thank you very much. Minister Restrepo, what about Colombia? What are the economic perspectives and what are the priorities for 2021? I'd like to greet UN first and my colleagues from in the panel. The first thing to say is to recognize that we come from a very difficult year as a humanity and as a nation as well. We were able to overcome because we wanted to protect life, which is the most important thing we have as human beings. And that ended up impacting on poverty. But we have a central priority as a government, which is not only safe reactivation, we need to also guarantee vaccination. Safe reactivation is the purpose of 2021, and we want to grow by 5%. And that commitment has several chapters. The first one, clean growth project in non-conventional renewable energies. We have a revolution here we're multiplying times 20 the non-conventional renewable energies with local and foreign investment. Second, with our commitment to the farmers and speeding up investment in those sectors in the country, in the farms. Third, something we cannot underlook, those that are the most vulnerable ones. In this pandemic, we have more vulnerability, and that's why we have implemented emergency financial help for those people. So we want to speed up also free educational programs. And last but not least, our commitment to job creation. And that is done with new infrastructure, both in roads, in ports, in airports, and we also help creative industries, those that nourish from culture, from innovation. And we are also now focusing on internationalization, second generation internationalization, which is attracting efficient companies that would cover the market. And we have already done that especially during the pandemic, in the agro-food industry, which has grown even in the middle of the pandemic. And the response in the SMEs, because that's where we have a lot of vulnerable people. We've given them access to financing, e-commerce, and recovering the tourism that in 2019 in Colombia, we had record numbers by attracting investment. We were able to foster an impulse tourism, and we are investing more than $40 billion to this end. And my final message is our commitment as a nation, as a country, and as humanity. The Venezuelan protection immigrants law. We want to protect them the way we are now living with them and receiving our Venezuelan brothers from a nation that is now not living now in democracy. We have committed ourselves as a nation to receive them and to give them what they need, and that will give back their dignity. And we know that that's a huge challenge, but the challenge, we are up for that challenge. We're going to face it as a team and with the commitment from everyone. And that's what I wanted to say about Colombia. Thank you very much. Let's see how you and your administration are facing pandemic challenges and making those challenges, turning those challenges into opportunities. So now let's go into investment, productive capacity, and integration. Minister Bissoldón, what are the challenges for the industrial sector due to the pandemic effects, and what is the administration, your administration, doing about it? First, of all, I told you that we have unified the industrial sector in Dominican Republic. And in that same regards, the intention here is to show great diversification of its products and high quality standards. We honestly have right now a sector that is the engine of reactivation during the pandemic of COVID-19. The free trade zone since 2020 sees in a much better way that the economic growth it had more than $5.1 million in investments, and 73.1% went to the U.S. $4 billion went to the U.S., which means and proves that they are our industrial partners. And Dominican Republic is very attractive in terms of investment, foreign investment, especially coming from the U.S. And the nearshoring boom that in Dominican Republic, it is a reality already, because we have to date 3 companies that have decided to bring their investments to Dominican Republic instead of expanding or settling in Asia. And we are having them settle down here this month, actually. Dominican Republic is the 3rd best country in terms of maritime connectivity, with a lot of destinations to the U.S. ports. Dominican Republic has some of the most important incentive packages for the free trade zones in the Western Hemisphere, with 6% of tax, national and local tax exemption, renewable to 5 years. And there is a free trade zone that was settled here in 1969 that they still have those tax exemptions with the security and the care that we have with that sector, which is still very important for job creation, for exports here in Dominican Republic. And we also have something that goes with the identity and the history of Dominican Republic. We are #1 in the world, which is the tobacco industry. In the tobacco industry, we are exporting $1 billion a year. And in numbers, it's about 8 billion mechanical tobacco company and 1 million in manual ones, all the premium brands around the world. And that's something that makes us feel very proud. Accumulated investment in that sector has doubled in a few years, with $4.5 billion in 2019, coming mostly from the United States, Canada, Europe, and Asia. And the accumulated investment of American companies in the free trade zone is $5.7 billion, a 34% of investment, total investment in 2019. And that is a clear response of the mobility of the supply chain to Dominican Republic. And I want to emphasize that because on Wednesday, there was an announcement that President Biden is going to sign a presidential order to attract investments, capital, American investments, capital to the Americas. And Dominican Republic, in that sense, seems to be we are prepared to be one of the biggest destinations for those, for that important investment. I don't want to miss this opportunity to and let you know that what Minister Restrepo also said with regards to the support and the openness that Dominican Republic gives to our brothers in the Americas, Venezuelan brothers more particularly, because not just only Venezuelans, we also shared an island that we are responsible for with Haiti, but with Venezuelans too. They have supported us, Venezuelans have supported us all the time, and the administration of Luis Abinader has declared measures, immigration measures to recognize the documents of those immigrants coming from Venezuela so that they have an open door to the integration and to jobs and regulations in Dominican Republic. Thank you, Minister. Minister Martinez, Panama is well known for its orientation towards foreign trade, as you highlighted before. And it's an important hub. Like you said, it's the hub of hubs for international trade. Could you perhaps be more specific? How are they improving institutions to receive foreign trade in Panama? Sure. Of course, with the idea of being a regional integrator, the Tocumen International Airport has been very helpful so that multinational companies send their CEOs and they go from one city to the other in the shortest time. We have also put in our country, we are one of the first 3 countries that have tested for early detection of the virus. And we have given foreign investors that live here to have a better control of the pandemic. We have also made it easier for the immigration into the country. So it makes it easier for immigrants to enter the country and live here and work here. Part of the special regime that makes us unique, apart from our geographic position and the connectivity, is the creation of the SEM, Multinational Enterprises regime system, with companies such as Procter & Gamble, 3M, Intel in 2020. Despite having a pandemic year, we have had 17 multinational companies that registered here in the country, with 38% increase in investment in the country, with an accumulated of 66 multinationals that are investing more than $1.1 billion and creating more than 1,700 direct jobs. And with that in mind, we have created a new special system, the EMA system, for companies that give manufacturing services, and giving them several range of activities that they can do: manufacturing, conditioning of products, repairs, analysis, tests, and logistics in Panama. So it is in that sense, with the goal of attracting and promoting investments in productive processes and advances in technologies and creating jobs. Both systems, the EMA, Multinational for Manufacturing, and the SEM for Multinational Service Companies, make of Panama a highly competitive destination for its privileged location, its infrastructure, and its strong international service platform. It is also in that sense that our intention is that more companies come here to settle down and to take advantage of the nearshoring business. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Minister Restrepo, this is the last question is for you. Colombia has just had the Alliance of the Pacific and LACAN. You are the president now. What are the ideas for regional integration and how can they become a reality? Well, and this question I like to emphasize, I want to think about something when we think about that. For those that suffer the pandemic was that lack of international leadership. And now we can see that impacting us in terms of, for example, buying some vaccines. Some countries have not been able to buy any vaccines, or some decisions that other countries have not imported the vaccines. And when we take over the presidency, and now being the presidents of the IDB, that is a sign for us that we are recovering leadership, multilateralism, free trade for everybody, the need to strengthen our integration mechanisms, and the urgency to work together in order to reactivate the economy. Within the framework of the Pacific Alliance, LACAN, and the IDB, what we have proposed are 4 places where we should work. First, to work more on integration. The Alliance of the Pacific, or the Pacific Alliance, is still very little. We need to take advantage of that alliance and the instruments we have to foster trade and investment, e-commerce, public auctions, and to give more help to productive sectors with the possibility of creating new destinations like the United States, or between Pacific Alliance countries and the rest of Latin America as well, so that they can also reach the United States. And third, we're going to foster the integration dialogue hand in hand with the IDB, so that we can approach with SICA and with Mercosur, and so that we start building new bonds in view of the fact of the future integration position. Second of all, we need more connected spaces, which means developing digital agendas. Speaking, for instance, of the data industry or the digital regional data, the 4th industrial revolution in the country. Third, we need spaces with more entrepreneurs. There is more facilitation in terms of trade with instruments such as blockchain or digitalization of our foreign trade offices, and also fostering networks to overcome limitations in some countries, especially, and to do it together and looking for more global scenarios, approaching our states, such as in the Pacific Alliance, and advancing in this relocation of companies together with the strengthening of the supply chain, the regional supply chains, and responding to that breakage of industrial chains at international levels. I think we have a lot of opportunities. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I wouldn't like to close without a challenge that I think we all have as a region, which is the challenge of sustainability, environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and entrepreneurial sustainability. After the pandemic, we need sustainable everything, and that is going to be the main character in the public policies. Thank you very much, Minister. Dear Minister, unfortunately, time has run out. I understand that we would all want to have more time to approach other topics. But to end, I'd like to thank you for sharing your points of view with us and our audience. And to close, I'd like to reinforce the commitment of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, AACCLA, and the MTAMS community to work together with you and the other countries in the region in order to strengthen the trade bonds and help foster sustainable economic growth and inclusive growth. Thank you once again. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to give the floor to my colleague Neil Harrington, Senior VP for the Americas, to talk about digitalization matters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne. That was a terrific session with Ministers Restrepo, Martinez, and Bisonó. We definitely appreciate all 3 of them sharing perspectives on trade, investment, and economic partnerships in the post-pandemic from 3 of the region's most dynamic economies in Colombia, the Dominican Republic, and Panama. I'm really pleased now to be able to welcome Mauricio Ramos, Chief Executive Officer of Millicom, for a virtual fireside chat on digital priorities in Latin America and the Caribbean. Mauricio has served as CEO of Millicom since April 2015 and was elected as an executive director of the company in June of last year. As many of you know, because a lot of you are loyal customers, Millicom is a leading provider of cable and mobile services operating under the Tigo brand in Latin America. And prior to joining Millicom, Mauricio was president of Liberty Global's Latin American division for 10 years. So no one knows the digital agenda in our region better than Mauricio. Importantly, also for us at the Chamber, Mauricio was also just elected as chair of our U.S.-Colombia Business Council in February. Well, actually 2 weeks ago. We've been thrilled to have him, and the Millicom team take such an active role in our program of work, both through the Colombia Council and also here through AACCLA. In the Colombia context, he's a dual Colombian and U.S. citizen who received a degree in economics, and a degree in law, and a postgraduate degree in financial law from the Universidad de los Andes in Bogota. And under his leadership, Millicom has helped strengthen and grow digital connectivity for hundreds of communities, not just in Latin America, but across Africa as well. We're especially excited to be able to count on his leadership and expertise given, as all of you know, getting regional digital policy right is a critical priority for AACCLA, given the potential of enhanced connectivity and implementation of digital tools to address two of our region's most vexing problems: tepid economic growth and lack of transparency and adherence to the rule of law. Mauricio, it's a real honor to welcome you. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak with business leaders and government officials from across the region.
Thank you, Neil, for having me here. I appreciate the invitation. I'm happy to help in any way I can, and just pleased to be here and share some thoughts humbly with all of you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. If you're amenable, we'll jump right into a few questions, which are certainly on our minds. Few people understand and are as committed to the critical task of bringing connectivity to emerging economies as you are. What do you see as the most challenging issues to address in terms of the public-private agenda?
Well, listen, as with everything that has to do with leadership and big changes and transformations, I think the key issue is the mindset. Just having the right mindset about the task ahead of you. I want to tell you a little anecdote because I think it's important to clarify what I mean. When I was growing up in Cali, Colombia, I remember watching the chivas, as we call them, the big buses, coming down the unpaved roads with the produce from the farms to be sold in the marketplaces. And this happens everywhere in our countries. And that was the way in which the economy was transporting its goods and services. It was transporting goods and services in chivas, in unpaved roads. Later on, when I was a student at the Universidad de los Andes, as you mentioned, I remember going to these development courses, the economy, how to develop an economy, not just macro and macro, but how to develop an economy. And all our teachers kept talking about the infrastructure that's required for development. And the notion that you learned 30 years ago at business school and economy school was economies need infrastructure to be developed. 30 years ago, that notion was ports, airports, roads, and railroads. So instead of chivas going down bringing tomates and cebollas to the local market, in order to be developed, our economies needed physical infrastructure, roads and airplanes and railroads. As we see it here today, our world has become digital. And our economies are now becoming increasingly digital. And what the pandemic showed us was that indeed these economies need to be increasingly digital so that the people in Tegucigalpa, in La Lima, in Bogota, everywhere can be connected to the digital economy that's happening in Silicon Valley, in Stockholm, everywhere else. They need digital connectivity. What we haven't changed the mindset to is that this is also infrastructure. Just like the physical economy, just like the tomates and the cebollas and all the physical products need airports and highways to be transported, just as we need to be connected with the world with physical infrastructure in order to make a part of being members of the digital society, the digital economy, digital citizens. We need to think of the digital highways as digital infrastructure. And when that chip changes mentally in the heads of our leaders, then things will start to become easier. Because then we will start thinking of the development of our digital economy as requiring what we call digital highways. And digital highways, if you think of it that way, is infrastructure for the digital development of our economies. So we should be thinking of connectivity, building these digital highways the same way we do about building airports and ports and highways. It is simply digital infrastructure for digital development. That's number one. And you'll see that with that, just a lot of ways of new thinking come.
Now, I think that's terrific insight, because especially when we're looking as to policymakers to enhance inclusion, which is something your company does every day. It's this type of connectivity, I think, that's going to be more easily achieved than even physical infrastructure, to really bring inclusion to especially the communities in our region that so desperately need it. Let me ask you next about 5G. Obviously, transition to 5G is being widely discussed globally. I'm very curious about your approach to 5G technology deployment.
Wow. Listen, 5G is one of those things in which we need to make sure that we are as ahead of it as we possibly can, because it shows great promise. But it's one of those things in which you got to tell your kids, you better learn to walk before you try to run. And I'll tell you why I say this. Because sure, 5G is happening in the developed economies, and all we hear in all the electronic shows and all we read in the papers is 5G. And if you don't deploy 5G, you're going to be left behind. I worry that we haven't finished the job just yet in building these digital highways the way they need to be built, so that on top of them, you can layer on 5G. In most of the developed countries where 5G is being built, those economies have reached 4G penetration of almost 100%. So 5G is being built into ecosystems that have plenty of existing connectivity, plenty of existing fiber, 100% 4G penetration, and are economies that can afford 5G at this point in time. In Latin America, just to give you an idea of what our digital divide is today, 4G penetration, the percentage of the population that has a 4G phone, that is connected to these digital highways with a car that drives at good speeds, it's only to 40 to 50% of the population. And the percentage of the households that have a cable or fiber connection is only 40 to 50%, give or take. Some countries may be further ahead, others are further behind. But it's not 90 or 100%, like since in developed economies. So we have a long way to still go so that we can claim that we have the ability to build 5G on top of our 4G. And the reason I worry is because we need to finish the 4G connectivity so that we don't leave a lot of people behind that cannot afford 5G stranded, and therefore increase the bigger digital divide that we have in our economies. So with 5G, we need to be right there, leading the development for some very important parts of our economy, but we also need to continue to have our eyes in finishing the 4G connectivity. So I'm all for 5G, but we cannot lose sight of the job that we haven't finished in 4G. 1 out of 2, if not more, of our homes, 1 out of 2 of our citizens in Latin America do not even have a 4G. And as a result of that, we have a more difficult task in Latin America, which is we have to do 5G, but we have to make sure that we finish the job on 4G first. To put it in context, the US have just finished their 5G spectrum auction, and so have some developed countries. They finished their 4G spectrum auctions 6 or 7 years ago. In Latin America, we just did the 4G auctions a year or two ago. So we need to leave some space. So we build out that 4G connectivity before we start running ahead and building 5G connectivity for the entire masses. Now, just to be clear, 5G can be deployed in granular ways so that the more advanced parts of the economy in our markets that do need that 5G connectivity have access to it. So yes, we can deploy it for business purposes in a granular, specific way, but let's finish the job on 4G for the entire population in our markets, because if we don't, we're only going to be accentuating the digital divide. And with that, let me perhaps go back to your first question and combine it with the second question, Neil. Mm-hmm. This digital highways, the reason why I think it's so important to think of them as infrastructure is because you immediately realize that they are hard to build. They're very capital intensive. So when you think of a port or an airport or a highway, you think capital intensive. It's exactly the same thing with a digital highway, capital intensive. Yeah. Covering Colombia or Peru, Argentina or Guatemala, any country with a digital highway is capital intensive. Point number one. Number two, just like in the physical infrastructure, you have to put the investment up front. You basically, when you build a port, you haven't received the first ship in. Or an airport, no airplane has actually landed. It's the same when you build your 4G or your 5G network, your 700 megahertz network. You have to build it first. So it's capital intensive, the money comes on front, and the third key point, just like physical infrastructure, the money, much more so than not, comes from abroad. Because our economies do not have capital markets that are developed enough, deep enough, so that they can finance these projects. I'll give you just an idea. Tigo, Millicom, we ran a balance sheet that is $8 to $9 billion. There's no way we can finance that amount of debt in our markets. Guatemala, Panama, Colombia, Salvador, etc. And the true is the same for all telecom operators in our markets. We finance abroad. So we're financing infrastructure products with capital from abroad, the US and Europe, to be brought in to develop our economies via the construction of those digital highways. In order to do that, you need to tell these investors two key things. One, there's going to be clarity and stability because this is a long-term investment. And two, you can get a return on your capital. Those are the key elements then that lead me to believe that the challenges ahead for us really lie on making sure we understand that we're building digital highways, which is digital infrastructure.
I really appreciate all those points. I think you mentioned some things I think we focus on every day. I think in the rule of law, from the rule of law perspective, it's exactly as you said. We companies require stability, transparency, predictability, and accountability on the part of governments. And nowhere is that more important than long-term infrastructure investments, as you're speaking to. I also am really fascinated by your discussion on how you lay out how 4G, as I'm understanding it, and getting 4G right and beyond a 40 to 50% penetration is the only way to pave the way towards the subsequent generations being successfully implemented, which is another way of ensuring that investors are going to be interested in a framework, 5G, 6G, 7G, that has already been well established by 4G.
I'll add a little bit to that, Neil, because it's important that we understand it. More than half the population in our markets does not yet have 4G, which means they haven't enjoyed the use of data the way you and I do in developed markets, or the way the urban population in some of our markets has 4G. And that's very important because 5G does not yet today have a user case that enhances the speed or the reliability or the connectivity for the individual user. It may have it in the future, but it doesn't today. What it does have is a whole bunch of use cases for businesses, what I call granular or specific. But we just need to make sure that we provide those for what they are without launching our communities in Latin America into a 5G frenzy that will be difficult to finance when we haven't finished the 4G, and that we therefore run the big risk of leaving a whole bunch of people behind. And we don't want to leave half of our economies behind, away from the digital world, because then the entire community will not develop.
No, I think that's so well said, and I really appreciate your thoughts in all of those areas. Let me, since I know we're running a little short on time, I can continue this discussion all day. It's fascinating. Let me conclude with a question kind of about the post-COVID world. As we begin to hopefully see an end of the pandemic with vaccine rollouts, fingers crossed, dedos cruzados, where should telecommunication providers and governments focus the post-COVID agenda?
One of the most interesting things we've seen is that we have found that not only end users, households, the community at large, but also governments have realized how important these digital highways are, and how important really is to have their communities connected, digitized, really is. So we've made a promise through all the pandemic to every single one of our governments and to every single one of our customers, that regardless of their economic situation because of COVID, we would keep them connected. And it has created, I think, a better pact, a better understanding between our regulators and ourselves, and between our customers and ourselves, that we will not unconnect anyone because this is so important. We will hold on to those customers, keep them with what we call a producto mínimo, a lifeline product, a reduced, a freemium product throughout the pandemic, because we need everyone connected for this digital economy to work going forward. Now, with that realization in mind, I believe governments have realized that they need to work a lot more with private companies like ours, that they need to really, really come to us to make sure that we're working together to keep everyone connected. It's not a win-win if the government is mandating. It's not a win-win if we're not doing our part. The second thing that in this post-COVID world makes me optimistic is that individuals, corporations, small businesses, and governments have finally gotten complete conviction of the importance of digitizing their processes, every single bit. We're having more and more customers come to us and say, I don't want to go to your store. Why don't we just interact digitally? And we say to them, well, everything's available to you, you just haven't used it before. And the usage of everything digital has gone up twofold. The same is true with corporations and small businesses that have basically come to us on the Tigo business part and say, I want to digitize my business a little bit more, so everything's on the cloud. Can you back it up for me? Can I make use of your data center? And everyone's coming with a need for things to be more digital. That means that our economies will be more resilient because everything will be backed up. It also means that governments will have a much more formalized economy, and it means that everybody will be more connected to the world digitally. The second thing, or the third thing I should say, that we've seen and makes me feel very good about our future is that out of this pandemic, not only is there more connectivity on broadband, but we've had the ability to help governments use telecom as a way to provide financial inclusion. In many of our markets, our mobile services have mobile payment platforms. Talk about innovation. You know, Apple TV and payment platforms have come to the US only in the last few years. We have Tigo Money, now over 5 million users throughout Latin America, many countries with over 1 million users. So you can pay on your phone. And governments have come to us and say, why don't I distribute some funds, some COVID relief funds through Tigo Money? And those funds go directly to the individuals. And this is good because they reach more cost efficiently, they ran the end beneficiary, and because we're being able to provide a lot more financial inclusion because the banks cannot quite reach there. And we don't compete with the banks anyway. We're just a payment platform. So I'm actually very, very optimistic, Neil, that our region will come out of this pandemic. Sure, it's going to be tough. 2021 is going to be tough, but it's going to come out more digital, more inclusive, more financially inclusive. And if we do our job well, more connected.
I think you absolutely concluded on the perfect points. I mean, I think that's what we're all for, right? We're all looking as to how we generate inclusive growth. Few areas that it can be done, I think, more effectively than with effective financial inclusion tools to help the unbanked become part of the mainstream economy. And I salute you and Millicom and your whole team for what you're doing in that regard. It's been a real pleasure to have you. Really, I hope we can do this again. We'd love to have you back in at any time your schedule allows to one of our next conferences. Happy
to be here, Neil. Happy to help the chamber. Happy to help these members. We're here all to make it just be better in the U.S. and in Latin America.
Thank you so much, Mauricio. Really appreciate your time. It's now my pleasure to be able to turn it over to my colleague, Erin McConaughey, who hosts Marcelo Cabral from the IDB for a discussion on the bank's approach across the region to the post-pandemic. Erin, take it away.
Thank you, Neil. We're honored today to feature Marcelo Cabral, manager for the social sector at the Inter-American Development Bank, to discuss the IDB's efforts to support the region's response to the COVID pandemic. Marcelo leads a multidisciplinary team at the IDB, focused on investing in people as a means of improving lives and overcoming the development challenges in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's hard to think of a more challenging time in which countries and their citizens suffer the negative consequences of, the economic and social ramifications of the COVID pandemic, or a time with more opportunities, really, to rethink how we work, how we do business, deliver education, social and health services to rebuild and support an inclusive economic recovery. Under his leadership, Marcelo's team has been working to assist countries in confronting COVID. No easy feat, as each country is different, as we're all aware, and leading discussions with the private sector on opportunities for collaboration with the IDB to support that response. His health sector team also has been working with the Americas Business Dialogue's new health working group to help foster robust health economies for the long run. Marcelo, could you please start us off by sharing your thoughts on COVID-19 response in the Americas, the IDB's role in assisting the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean to acquire, deploy, distribute the COVID-19 vaccine and other critical health interventions?
Of course, Erin, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I hope that you can hear me. Can you hear me? All right, just checking, you never know these days. Thank you again for the opportunity. Yeah, indeed, it's been a difficult time last year and what it's so far this year. We're still working with this unprecedented challenge from the COVID. It's been bad for every continent, but Latin America has been especially hit by COVID. Let me just give you two numbers that I think that they represent the real implications of COVID in Latin America. We have 8% of the world population in the continent, Latin America and the Caribbean, if you put both together, and we accounted for 18% of the total cases. If you read the New York Times today, you see that if you take only South America, it's a fifth of the population of the world, and we have 450,000 total deaths in the subcontinent, which is it's a 20% of the total death for the entire world. So as you can see, it's been especially harsh on Latin America and the Caribbean. You said it already. Of course, the situation is not homogeneous. It's very heterogeneous and it varies a lot country by country. So I think that the first point that I want to make is, as I make my remarks and as we have our discussion, of course, nuances and different situations will apply. Now, I started talking about the COVID, but I think that we need, if you're thinking about private-public conversations here, we need to remember that it's not the magnitude of the crisis that we have, but also the situation that we had before the pandemics. And probably you'll remember the social protests that we have in Chile, in Brazil, in Ecuador pre-pandemic. People were protesting for things like inequality, labor informality, lack of housing, access to quality health services, and they were very unhappy. Our studies that we did last year during the pandemic, and we are continuing this year, are pointing at a multiplication by 10 times the level of discontent in Latin America. So as we move forward to the post-pandemic conversation, we need to be aware for everybody doing business in Latin America that we're going to have to be alert of the potential social crisis that we might have. That doesn't mean that we will have them, but we need to be alert. Of course, you're going to ask me, well, what to do? And the answer is not an easy answer anyways. Big reforms are needed, and they are needed soon. We are already thinking, for example, how to help countries to reopen their services very quickly, because if we take too much time, we will increase the pressure, the social pressure on the governments. But my second point is that the private sector should be aware that it's not only health, it's not only the social sector, but it's the overall governance of our countries that will be in play when we move into the post-COVID conversation. My third point is a little bit more about the IDB, what we done during the pandemic, and for you to know how more or less we manage our investment during the pandemic. We did 4 things that we thought that were urgent. The first one was strengthening the health sector, and I'm going to say more about that. But we did, the emergency investments, but we also tried to protect the long-term investment that we were already putting in place, because we understood that we needed to continue that kind of investment, thinking, of course, about the pandemic. And I'm going to go back to that. So we strengthened health sector. We also did a lot of supporting income and consumption for vulnerable populations. Safety nets in Latin America were weak. So we tried to help governments to do as rational as possible of a job in expanding the safety nets there. We had huge challenges there with governments. We have challenges of identification of beneficiaries, how to actually register them into what it would be a role of beneficiaries. And the other issue that we had, which also we were quite a bit with the private sector, was the issue of payment. The lack of access to banks and bank accounts were really a challenge for us. We work on that, but moving forward, we look at the needs for more investment and more rationalization of that investment in the issue of income and for consumption of vulnerable populations. We also work with small and medium enterprises, and that's something that our president, Mauricio Claver, always talks about. 70% of our business in Latin America is represented by small and medium enterprises. So we work quite a bit to sustain them. We sustain them in the emergency via subsidies, but also we try to preserve their human capital via upskilling and reskilling of their labor force. And we started to do that while they were not at work directly. And last but not least, and this is not going to be a surprise for you, we supported quite a bit of fiscal policy measures, emergency fiscal policy measures, basically through policy-based lending, which is something that we do quite a bit in this situation of crisis. So that's a big picture of what the IDB did. Let me move now very quickly to the health sector specifically. At the beginning, we urgently destined more than $330 million for 12 countries actually, and we of course, we work as many other institutions on protective personal equipment, PPEs, and also medical equipment. I have to make a note here, as we will discuss probably with the issue of vaccines. The market for PPEs and medical equipment during the beginning of the pandemic, and we always said it, not jokingly, but very seriously, it was like a Wild West, actually, in terms of a market. So we are seeing something of that here now today as we see vaccines. So I think that's something that we need to discuss, which is how we're going to do to develop markets that are much more rational and they don't discriminate against, for example, small countries. I'm sorry. Is there something there? No. Okay. So we also work on test and lab capacity, and we did that quite consistently. In April of last year, we have already approved $1.2 billion for 9 countries in the health sector, and it looks as a small number probably, but actually the problem, and this is something that we also need to notice, was not a problem of quantity, but the capacity of absorption from the countries in terms of our financing. Governments have to follow complicated procurement processes, especially to buy medical equipment, and that's not very friendly for markets. We need to be aware that we need to modernize procurement policies, especially if we want to be in tune with what the market actually needs. Let me finish with this. That's the story until now, the story of responding to the emergency. But we have new challenges in the horizon. The first one, not a surprise to you, fiscal constraints. So we can go and say that we need to increase our expenditures in the health sector, but it's going to be extremely challenging. The IMF is forecasting a contraction of 9.4% of GDP, a mild recovery in 2021, and a colleague of mine is saying that we're not going to go back to the same levels of growth for at least 4 years. So in 2025, we're going to go back to 2020. That's what he's saying. I'm not sure what's going to be, but probably he's close to reality. The second issue, it's a collective understanding that we need to invest in critical aspects of the health system, especially to manage what it would be a co-living environment with the Covet. We're going to be cohabitating with the Covet probably for the next at least 1 to 2 years, and maybe I'm short there. So we need to prepare our health systems to actually respond to that. And last but not least, we have to resume our investments in infrastructure. We do have a long-term need in terms of new equipment and new infrastructure, especially thinking, and this is more structural but needed for the conversation, that Latin America is going to become in 25 years the oldest region in the world. So we will have evolving needs in the markets. Erin, that's all from my side. Thank you for the time.
No, thank you very much. That was actually quite comprehensive, and I think we can dig a little into some points based on that. Thanks. So you outlined a bit of the IDB's efforts to support the region writ large during COVID. Now that the world has various approved vaccines on the market, how can the IDB and other stakeholders support the system as a whole? So production, logistics, distribution, and importantly, the access equity issues, which you were alluding to earlier.
That's a very good question and a difficult one. Nowadays, I mean, our early bet, and I think that it was timely, was to try to find ways of supporting the countries to join into global efforts such as COVAX, and we worked quite a bit with COVAX to bring the voice and the needs of Latin America into the mechanism. I know that we are all frustrated today with COVAX and the speed in which COVAX is moving, but I think that if we don't have COVAX, we need to think about other ways of democratizing the market of vaccines. So that's the first thing that we need to, I think, that discuss, is whether we find other ways of doing this more cooperative-based type of approach to vaccine, or we're going to go into what is still a proto-market and a very opaque market of vaccines. So we are working with COVAX, but we are also open now to bilateral deals and to finance bilateral deals. But we are not doing that alone, and that's the principle there. And the principle is not just to finance vaccines, because that would be half of the job, as you see nowadays. Because countries, even we need to understand that it's very challenging especially for Latin American and Caribbean countries, to get the vaccines nowadays. Even when they get the vaccines, then they have challenges to actually administer the vaccine. So what we are doing with vaccine financing, it's also institutional strengthening. And here we start to look at opportunities for business. No, we are reviewing, of course, policy frameworks. We are working with what it would be intra-country vaccine allocation priorities. That is it's a challenge for sure. You see that in many countries. Operational and procurement plans and information systems and communication strategies. So we're insisting on the countries to have a plan in place. We're working with OPS in order to do that. And last but not least, we are also insisting in other investment that is needed. It's not only regulations and a good vaccination plan, but also I think in the long term, we're going to need storage and distribution infrastructure that is much better than we have today. Logistics capacity, and I think that we need to tap onto the private sector and their capacity to actually do that. That's easier said than done, and it's not happening so far, but we need to work on that. Medical supplies, hiring and training of personnel, PPEs, of course, that's going to be a need, and waste management in general, it's something that we have there. So vaccination, the regulatory environment around the issue of vaccination, and also related investments are the way to go for us in terms of how we work with the vaccine in Latin America and the Caribbean area.
Thank you. I mean, I want to pull in a couple of threads from your initial comments and then that for a second, which is, I mean, part of the region, part of the reason that the region has been hit so hard has been chronic underinvestment, right, in the health sectors. And the pandemic sort of provides us with, that opportunity to build back better, to borrow a phrase. But governments, as we've discussed, are going to have a hard time doing it alone, thanks to the fiscal constraints and other things that you've outlined. So could you dive a little more into what role you think the private sector can or should play, right, in constructing inclusive, robust health economies, and how they can best work with the IDB?
All right, Erin, let me just tell you that we are insisting, and this is an interesting conversation inside of the bank. We are talking about building back, and we hear often building back better, and we are adding to building back better and more inclusive, and that goes back to the issue of inequality that I outlined already. So I think that as we move into conversations of opportunities, we always need to keep in mind that we need to build back better and more inclusive. But to your point of how we can work with the private sector, I want to be very concrete about what we can do, especially in the health sector. I can talk about other sectors, but I think that the conversation it's more, in this moment it's urgent in the health sector. So the first point is we need to work on increasing labs, test, and tracing capacity. We were not ready when we started the pandemic with that. There is a lot of room for investment there, both from national concerns and international concerns. So this is a difficult thing. It's critical, especially because we're going to constantly be trying to go back to safer activities. So we need to work on labs, test, tracing capacity, and strengthening the surveillance system. The private sector has an opportunity there. We see many solutions out there in the market that would help us to put together surveillance systems that are much more robust than what we have today. I think that the other thing that the private sector should be looking at is case management capacity, especially the reconfiguration of services to ensure proper pathways for caring, not only COVID patients, but also other patients. Case management is something that we also need to work on. A third topic that I wrote down for this conversation that I'd like to talk about, it's like the continuity of essential services. We need to work not only with what it would be COVID-related services, but also the services that were already there, and how we can put together infrastructure to ensure the continuity of those services, even in emergency situations. And that's something that didn't happen to us. And I think that to very few countries actually happened during the pandemic. So how do we continue service while we take care of an eventual crisis? In the fourth one, it's one of my favorite, and I think that the sky is the limit here. It's the acceleration of the digital transformation of the health sector. Both for decision making and for virtual medicine. Everybody talks quite a bit about telemedicine, telediagnostics, and the opportunities there, and they are there. Those countries that were prepared in Latin America, they did a fantastic job in increasing telemedicine, for example, and that's going to be the future of medicine in many countries in Latin America, but also for decision making. And there's an opportunity there to manage digital decision making, clinical and non-clinical, in a way that they're more efficient, they're more consumer oriented, but also they allow for a better investment on the public and the private side. Let me finish with this. Digital transformation cannot be done without preparing our human resources to do that. So as companies move into the issue of digital transformation, they always need to be aware that they need to ensure that there's the proper framework for developing human resources related to those investments. Otherwise, it's going to be a lose-lose situation.
Actually, thank you, Marcelo. You actually read my mind on what the next question was going to be. I was going to ask you what the future.
I hope that I can monetize reading minds, but I'm not sure if I can do it.
I'm afraid I have like 5 different questions, and I think we've run out of time. But if I could ask you to maybe deliver one sort of last message before we exit, which is, in brief, part of the challenge has always been that the health sectors are siloed off from the rest of the economy, rather than seen as a strategic sector, both for inclusion and for growth. What would be your sort of parting message to the private sector participants and on this event for how best to work with the regional the governments throughout the region, and then we'll close.
Erin, that's actually an easy question, difficult to do, but easy to answer. And the answer is what we see in our clients, in our country clients in Latin America. It's a renewed interest in the health sector. So the opportunities are there for have early conversations immediately after we leave the post-vaccine crisis that we have now, the vaccine crisis that we have now. I think that the answer is go early to governments, have the conversation, start from there, how they're going to manage the next crisis. And from there, you can build up onto more long-term and medium-term investments. So this is the moment, actually. Even with a fiscal crisis, I think that nobody is going to deny that the health sector should be a priority.
Thank you again. I really appreciate your time and the contributions and collaboration, close collaboration we've had with your team. So now, thanks. Sorry. Now I just want to turn it over to my colleague, Isabel, who we will have a discussion on the the economic outlook for the region. So, Isabel, take it away, and thanks again, Marcelo. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcelo and Erin, for a fantastic conversation on the COVID response happening in the hemisphere. And we agree, there are a lot of reforms that need to happen in our region. And we want to make sure that we don't miss out on this opportunity as well. We couldn't agree with more with the fiscal reforms that need to happen, and also the digitalization. That's something that we've been talking through in this afternoon's conference. And as we're getting here towards our end of our conference, we want to make sure that we're hearing from our participants. You also have an opportunity to send your questions, especially for our last panelist. Right on this feature, it's called Slido. Please sign in, send us your questions, and we'll hopefully have our next speaker be able to answer them. We also want to continue this conversation, not only today, but past today's conference. Please follow us on social media. In today's conversation, use the AACCLA hashtag to make sure that we're hearing from you and ensuring that we're addressing the most pertinent topics in our region. And as we pivot to our next keynote speaker, there is no better conversation to tie this conversation together. We've spoken about trade, global trade priorities, COVID response, but what do we see in the economic outlook in our region? With that, I'd like to welcome the World Bank's Chief Economist for Latin America and the Caribbean region, Martin Rama, His top priorities at the bank are to provide intellectual leadership on development issues facing Latin America and the Caribbean, and to promote high-quality analytical work about the region. Although from Uruguay, his experience does not stop in our region, as he also has vast experience in Asia as the former chief economist for the South Asia region at the World Bank. Again, we invite our participants to ask questions, and we hope to have a dynamic conversation. With that, Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Isabel, and thank you, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, for inviting me to this fascinating conversation. Let me just make a few points so that we can go into a conversation after that. And some of the points have already been made by my predecessors in this event, but let me emphasize a few of them. The first one, the most obvious one, our region is the worst hit by this crisis. And is the worst hit on two fronts, the health front and the economic front, not just one. When the COVID crisis started, like a year ago, you will read academic articles, epidemiological simulations, and they will be worrying about what will happen in the poorest countries, countries that didn't have healthcare systems, intensive care units. So a lot of the concern was what will happen in sub-Saharan Africa, what will happen in South Asia. Well, it turned out that it was our region, the one that was worst hit, as bad as Europe, as bad as the US. And most probably our numbers are underestimates. For some countries with good healthcare systems, Chile, Brazil, probably the numbers we have on COVID death are quite reliable. For some other countries, the Andean countries, based on excess mortality data, they are seriously underestimated. And some countries have chosen just not to focus on COVID because they had too many other problems. So on the health front, it was very bad. And it was very bad despite having done almost everything by the book. When the COVID crisis hit Latin America, everybody was looking at what's happening in Italy, in Spain. The region went into lockdowns, quarantines, did whatever it could, and it didn't work the way it was expected. Probably getting people locked down at home in slums without good water sanitation was not such a good idea. Maybe it was not so easy to enforce the lockdowns. People need to go out, need to work, so that made it very complicated. We also have populations that are older than other developing countries, more comorbidities. So on the health front, very bad impact. But on the economic front too. So we are a region that is facing in 2020 a decline that is the biggest among all the regions. So that's the first point to make it clear. We are in a very bad position overall. Second point is there is heterogeneity. This is a vast region, a vast continent, and you have all the variation. For instance, at one end, you have countries like Paraguay, which mainly depend on the export of agricultural commodities. Growth in China and in East Asia has been good or decent. So Paraguay may end up the year pretty well, and pretty well on the health front too. At the other end, you have the Caribbean countries, which are heavily dependent on tourism. They don't have many chances to diversify. And if there is one sector that has been seriously hit by this pandemic, it's tourism. So you have all this range between just a couple of points of decline in GDP to double digits and serious double digits. And that's my second point. Third point, a few things have been not as bad as we feared. First is trade. Trade has bounced back, international trade, a lot. In fact, when people are stuck at home and cannot go to the movies and they buy something through Amazon, basically trade and value chains and logistics are going up. So we are seeing a situation in which trade is back. And quite surprisingly, given the trade tensions we have, in which trade, the East Asian part and the China part of trade has increased substantially, because that's where the supply comes from when you are buying through Amazon in many cases. Now, that is in some way a positive news for the countries in the region that very much depend through their commodities on what happens in East Asia. Remittances have been holding relatively well too. At the beginning of the crisis, like 8 months ago, we were expecting a 20% decline in remittances this year. We are seeing, if anything, a slight growth. Why that is so, we can discuss. probably related to the altruism of migrant families, also related to the generosity of the CARES program in the US, which helped many of them cope and assist their families. Importantly, we were feeling a very bad situation on the financial front. We were expecting, given the capital outflows we saw in the first few weeks of the crisis, we were expecting that access to financial markets will be much worse in this crisis than in the global financial crisis of 2007-8. It turned out that no. Some countries, of course, were cut from international markets before the crisis, Argentina, Ecuador, but for most of the countries in the region, access to markets has been maintained. The ability to issue debt and bonds in international markets has remained. In fact, the region has issued more debt in 2020 than it did in 2019 at lower interest rates on average. And that has allowed some fiscal response, which has been a saving grace in this period, because a lot of the fiscal response that took place went to social transfers, with Brazil being the most extreme case, that helped support consumption, that helped support families. But it's not just Brazil. We see it in many other countries. So these things have cushioned. It could have been worse in a way, but these developments have somewhat cushioned the shock. Now, where does this take us in 2021? First, the kind of fiscal response we saw in Peru, in Brazil, in Colombia, was very good. It was unexpected in some cases because of its magnitude, comparable to the response we saw in advanced economies. But the question is, for how long can you continue with this level of spending? Basically, the countries in the region have added, on average, 10 percentage points of GDP in debt, which is quite a lot, especially considering that for many of them, they were starting from a relatively high point. So what started a year ago, like running a sprint and doing whatever it takes to make it to the finish line, is gradually becoming a marathon. As several of the other participants said, we probably are into variants of COVID and variants over the next few months. And the fiscal spending that was supported during the last year may not be there. Many countries are starting to think seriously about the way to consolidate fiscally. What may help is first, there is a mechanical effect. When you have this kind of decline, the next year just mechanically is better, because in general, Q4 of 2020 was not as bad. And so when you take the entire 2020, the impact was very big. But if Q1 2021, Q2 continue on the path we are seeing, then compared to the average of last year, we will get some growth. And some countries will do well. I think we will have uncertainties there. For instance, for the Caribbean countries, very importantly, what will happen with tourists? If tourists doesn't come back, these countries have great difficulty to diversify. We have other aspects that several have been talking about, several of the participants have been talking about here, and that are especially relevant for a U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I think this crisis has exposed the difficulties and the dangers of heavy dependence on value chains when there is a shock. We were thinking always how to minimize cost. Now we need to think a bit more how to manage risk. And all these ideas about nearshoring may be good for countries in Latin America, especially for those that have deep trade agreements signed with the US, signed with the European Union, because that ensures a business climate and some guarantees and competition, subsidies, and the like, that will allow perhaps Mexico, Colombia, Dominican Republic to seize this opportunity. So some may have the good news of China growing strongly again. Some may have the good news of nearshoring offering more opportunities. But there remain uncertainties as to what the medium-term impact is, and I want to highlight three. One, on the negative side, is we will have had a shock on human capital. Schools have been closed throughout the region many days, many months. For many children from disadvantaged backgrounds, this will be very difficult to repair. Many young men and women may never return to school because they have had to move to supporting their families. So that's one element to take into account. Second, on the positive side, and it was emphasized before, is the potential of digitization, which will be needed. We need to work remotely much more, but may have effects not only on productivity, also on bringing competition to sectors that have been very difficult before, where through reforms we have not made so much progress. Financial inclusion is one of them. Now, if in addition to banks, you have IT companies providing financial services, that brings much more competition. We have a region that is very unbanked given its level of development, but a lot of people have a mobile phone, so solutions can exist there. Same thing on employment. We have rigidities that have been difficult to handle, and there are good reasons why we need labor market interventions, but also there is capture of these labor market interventions and rigidities. Working through platforms is a way to really find jobs and new employment, and we are seeing quite a lot of that happening. Same thing on trade. We have had this region with the most trade agreements signed per country, and yet we have the lower level of trade relative to GDP of all regions. So it's not through signing new agreements among ourselves that we may make a lot of progress, but working through the internet, selling on internet platforms is a way to integrate in the world. And finally, bureaucracy. If governments need to go into e-government, we may reduce administrative red tape, we may reduce possibilities of corruption. So all of that is quite encouraging. Again, as a summary, worst hit region, not everybody hit the same way because it's a heterogeneous region. Some better news than expected and some possibilities of rebound that are not negligible. But I will end with a point that Marcelo Cabrol made before. We are not arriving to this crisis with just booming economies. Latin America and the Caribbean have been for several years with very mediocre economic growth, with stagnation in social indicators, poverty, inequality, with an entire year of discontent in 2019. A dozen countries had violent demonstrations reflecting, for a variety of reasons, not easy to pin down to one mechanism, but showing an enormous discontent. And we are now having this crisis. And so it will be difficult for governments to really stay the course and do the right thing. The temptations for populist solutions, for magical solutions, for going back to old ways that didn't work, but because of how messy everything has been over this year, may look tempting. So I would say in the end, the biggest risk perhaps for the region comes from ourselves and the kind of policies that we will manage to put together to emerge from this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. That was a fantastic overview on really what we're seeing in the region and still some opportunities, as you had mentioned. As questions are starting to roll in from our audience, I'm going to take one of the first ones. It says, how can small business owners access funds from the many economic reactivation funds investments mentioned by the speakers that are directed to help current business in Latin America in the region? And just to add, I believe it's more even on the Caribbean, as you mentioned, that they're so much into tourism. Like, what are other areas that small businesses could focus on?
I think that's an excellent question. And across the region, there have been multiple efforts to provide credit lines, guarantees for businesses to borrow. I think we have seen two kinds of difficulties along the way. One is that many of these lines, of course, need to just to make sure that there is some discipline, tend to be implemented through financial institutions, which also have to put some skin in the game so that the money is not just going away. And of course, for financial institutions, it's easier to support the bigger ones, the most profitable ones, than the ones that are borderline and that they are really struggling. So that has resulted in a lower uptake of these credit guarantees and credit lines than was anticipated. Good news is there are lower risks in terms of contingent liabilities building up, but in terms of the support to economic activity, that has been difficult. Second is, no matter how much finance you provide, if there is a solvency issue at play, if there are no customers, what you're doing is building up debt. And so it's not just the financial sector side that will need to be at play. A lot will depend on how fast and how well we go back to some form of normalcy. It's very clear that in many countries in the region, popular patience for lockdowns and containment measures is becoming thin. But if we don't find safe ways to operate again, be it through effective vaccination or through better containment measures that allow mobility to continue, things like tourism will not come back, because tourists will not want to go to places that are perceived as high risk. So I think we have a conundrum there, and we may be seeing some of the costs in terms of jobs of this crisis still in 2021. We have not seen all of it yet.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take one more question, and it's, can you comment on the potential impact of increased freight rates on the global trade patterns? Could this be an opportunity for moving production closer to the U.S. markets?
Yeah, I think, as I said, the near-shoring, the just-in-case as opposed to the just-in-time, or as a complement to the just-in-time, are opportunities for Latin America. We are very near the advanced economies. We are seen as part of the same, in geopolitical terms, part of the same kind of society. So there may be countries in the advanced economies that may want to do that. But in order to invest and to raise money, you need to make sure that the countries where you're investing are safe, are attractive, are credible in their policies. And it's in that respect that this is not just a trade agenda. It is not just saying, oh, let's lower tariffs and let's get some agreement. I think the kind of very deep trade agreements that we have seen in recent times, like US, Mexico, Canada, or the agreement that was signed but not yet approved formally between the European Union and Mercosur, are interesting because they go much deeper than just trade. They make sure that competition, state-owned enterprises, subsidies, public procurement, but also legal and labor and environmental standards are up to what you expect for the conduct of business, are in place. Several countries in Latin America have already those kind of trade agreements. That's why I was referring to countries like Colombia. Colombia is in a very good position in that respect. Dominican Republic and the Caribbean. I'm not sure that there will be appetite in these years where everybody's struggling with difficulties to sign many more of these agreements. But I think for the region, tapping those that exist, and for companies in the US and elsewhere to understand where they have that security in the environment, that would be great. And of course, labor-intensive exports is something that Latin America and the Caribbean desperately need.
Martin, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts on that. From the private sector, we are eager to move, and we want to make sure that we are part of the reactivation, especially in the region, the hardest hit part of the world. And we're hoping through our network here, through our 23 AmChams in 20 different countries, that we're able to support these efforts. I want to thank you again for participating in today's conference. We appreciate your remarks, and we hope to have this dynamic conversation throughout the year, and hopefully, again, we see an uptick, an economic uptick that we're also a part of. And so with that, once again, thank you so much, and thank you for our participants. And I will now give the floor back to our chair, Jose Luis Sanchez, chairman of the Association of American Chambers of Commerce in Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you, Isabel. On behalf of AACCLA, thank you for participating in AACCLA's 2021 Outlook on the Americas Conference. We thank our distinguished speakers from the public and private sectors and multilateral organizations for bringing their vision and strategic perspectives on the region. Today, we gain insights into a wide range of issues, including Covet response on the hemisphere, regional trade integration, digital transformation, and the economic outlook. We look forward to working with all of you to build a more favorable environment for trade and investment and reactivate economic growth. This year, AACCLA will continue to serve as a platform to resource and advancing an agenda of free trade, innovation, regulatory certainty, and respect for the rule of law. We will work with AmChams to help companies make new business connections and take advantage of opportunities for increased trade and investment with the United States and among the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. I am pleased to invite you to join us for AACCLA's first ever B2B networking event on April 20 through 22nd. We have partnered with Inter-American Development Bank and Connect Americans to create the virtual space for our companies to come together and foster new business partnerships. For more information, please contact the AACCLA Secretariat. As always, we invite you to stay actively engaged in the AACCLA network and our program of work. With that, thank you again for your participation in the AACCLA 2021 Outlook on the Americas.